Let's talk, Internet, about video games. You might have seen some stuff going around lately, stuff about video games maybe not being what they once were. I certainly have, and they make a lot of good points. It's why I'm here today, a man with a cardboard box for a head, and totally not something else, here to tell you a story about how I fell out of love with video games, and then found it again. Why? Well, apparently this isn't an uncommon thing, and as everyone already knows, the experiences of another often help us contextualize our own. You see, the year was 2013. I was a troubled youth who had difficulties with life, and by the grace of very kind parents, I was able to waste the extreme amounts of free time I'd fallen into doing whatever I wanted. This ended up being video games. A lot of video games. I had World of Warcraft, although it was Warlords of Draenor, so not really. I had a lot of other games too, though. Skyrim was still a pretty new game back then, and Dark Souls was really only just beginning to be appreciated as the new hit formula for the fantasy genre. Speedrunning was on the rise, and old-school RuneScape had just come out. The thing was, I had been playing video games for a long time. I was in my early 20s, and 20 to 25 is what I wholeheartedly believe to be when the dark age for any gamer starts. We as human beings change as we age, and the brain keeps maturing until we turn about 30 or so. I couldn't tell you if that really has any effect on this, because I'm not a doctor, but people tend to uniformly go through certain things at certain ages, and video games are absolutely a matter of mental perception. I'm glad, probably for the first time in a while, that I'm probably older than most people watching this, because I have a perspective here that shows you something that might seem absurd, but is also very familiar. You see, when Skyrim first released, I really didn't like it like I liked Oblivion or Morrowind. The first playthrough was amazing, but repeat playthroughs were harder to enjoy, and I blame the game for that. I blame StarCraft 2 for not being as enjoyable as StarCraft Brood War, and while it helps the point, I still think Brood War is a superior strategy game. I mean, it's the Counter-Strike of the genre, it'll never go away. In that same vein, Call of Duty had gotten stale, but looking back, I think I felt that way because people spent a lot of time ragging on it for not innovating. Still, StarCraft 2 is a very good game, and at the time I would emphatically preach that it sucked. Warlords of Draenor was a genuinely bad WoW expansion for a number of reasons, but the game certainly had its areas of enjoyment, which I couldn't seem to find. Old school RuneScape cemented my belief that, for many years, RuneScape 3, as it was called, had been going in the wrong direction. Dark Souls was genuinely new in formula, although technically the credit should go to Demon Souls, but it was a bright spot in a time where things just didn't hit the way they used to. Dark Souls, in that way, became the beginning of my understanding for why things had changed. At this point, you're probably a little shocked with my assessment, especially if you're younger. You grew up with these games, and they're the classics of your heart. It's not a secret that StarCraft 2 is a good game, even if some people still prefer Brood War, like me. Modern RuneScape is the same as StarCraft 2, just in regards to old school. Skyrim is, legitimately, a game many of us still play more than 11 years later, myself included. It's been a lot of blustering to this point, but I think framing my state of mind is important, because people are framing their own state of mind in a similar way now. They lived through Shadowlands and BFA in World of Warcraft. Every battle royale is the same and done to death. MOBAs like League of Legends and Dota 2 are just vats of toxicity not worth entertaining, and more traditional shooters feel like they haven't done anything new for the last decade. Likely, you feel only an insane person would look at the way you feel and say, you're wrong. But you are, you fucking idiot. Video games have always been like this. The truth is, you're not changing either. Rather, you're reaching a threshold of understanding that everyone does at some point. It's that opposite of magical moment where you really come to realize the full scope of video games as they are. You've done it. You've traveled the world and seen all the ways it can be done. You've played roguelites and MOBAs, MMOs and RPGs. Shooters, real-time strategy, turn-based strategy, auto chess. Puzzle games like Portal and Superliminal. Quirky indie hits like Undertale and Papers, Please. You have to go farther and farther in a league to get excited when playing Path of Exile, and every iteration of Borderlands makes you wish for something you lost in a previous entry. The further you go, the less exciting it's becoming, even though the opposite was true at the start. Why, though? That's always the question, right? Why, though? Well, as far as volume, I think the reason so many people are getting hit by this right now is because of COVID. The pandemic locked you up in a box like the darker periods of my life did, and you've ingested more video game goodness in the last couple years than you probably did in the prime of your teenage gaming years. The thing is, you're older now. You've moved into all sorts of new areas, and you probably have more expendable income. It's the leisure equivalent of eating cake for dinner. The experience has been a blast, but now you're sick of cake, and probably a little sick in general. If you're one of these people, having the context laid out likely makes one reason obvious. You're burnt out. The thing is, video game burnout doesn't work like burnout elsewhere in life, although taking time away can still help. When you play enough, the feeling of something truly new happening in a video game starts to become few and far between. When this happened to me, I still played, but nothing ever really got done. I started to spin my wheels, looking for something to commit to and invest my time in a way that I could get excited about. Pursuits felt hollow. At a certain point, I started spending more time watching other people play games than playing them myself, because their enthusiasm appealed to my own vicariousness. Definition for vicarious on the screen now, because everyone should know this word. Maybe you didn't get to the point of spending more time watching than playing yourself exactly the way I described it, but I bet some part of that journey was more familiar than you're comfortable with. It's a kind of depression, really, and I can say that as someone who's dealt with their fair share of it. You want to do something, but you're robbed of the energy and the enthusiasm necessary to go after it. That's only half my story, though, and probably the part you're personally familiar with if you're here watching this video. Don't worry, if you love video games even half as much as I do, your story isn't over. That said, finding some non-video game hobbies isn't a bad idea. This is kind of an aside, but I disc golf most of the year and I go bowling during the winter. A little bit of physical sporting goes a long way in a person's life. The thing is, and this is what personally took me so much time to get over, is that when you arrive at this point, you're not at a low point. It's easy to think things are bad, that you're falling out of love with video games, but that's really not what's happening. You, and only you alone, can determine what you get out of video games. That said, watching other people play games and talking with your friends, it's very easy to attach value to your time that isn't based on your own interests. You might see someone play Hades and see them on some absurdly high heat level for a challenging run, accomplishing incredibly difficult things, and think that's what you have to go for. By all means, enjoy their display of skill, but realize that this is one of the first traps we fall into. When we're young, we don't really comprehend the ultimate goal of a video game. And when we get older, we still don't. Stop setting goals before you've played the game yourself. Unless you've invested hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours into an individual game, your perception of what is hard or fun is entirely your own. As you get older, as you become more experienced and the wow factor of experiencing something new becomes harder to find, it becomes more and more important to look at what really appeals to you in a game and make that the pinnacle of achievement in your gaming. The best personal example of this I have right now is in World of Warcraft's latest expansion, Dragonflight. I don't have the Mythic Plus dungeon mount. I haven't killed Razageth in an organized raid. I mean, I could have. Don't misunderstand my ability to play the game. I just haven't really enjoyed organized PvE stuff lately. In fact, I only killed Razageth in LFR to accomplish the goal I did end up choosing for myself. And I can guarantee I'm in a very small percentage of Dragonflight's population that has capped their renown with all 4 factions. That might not sound interesting to you, and I'll be honest, it didn't sound interesting to me either when I started the game, but it's what turned out to be compelling, and it became the reason to log in. That and making tons of gold. Conversely, I'd probably have a lot of complaints about the state of the game if I had forced myself to push content I wasn't interested in. And that's the trap that so many of us fall into. More likely than not, someone in your position was legitimately very good and or competitive at a game prior to their existential crisis of, why am I playing video games? Maybe not, and you just saw how good other people were and wanted the recognition they got for yourself. These are toxic mindsets, ones that often lead to self-hating, because I can assure you that no one achieves competitive excellence for any other reason other than that they want to be there independently. And that's what this is about. That's what we all need, independence in our desires. It's a sense of independence in our desires that, no matter where they lie, brings us happiness. Not every hobby has these issues. Sports are always about self-improvement, and for the competitive, there is competition. But a sport is easily understood as fun independent of a trophy or recognition. Likewise, we always read a book for ourselves. But then there's chess, one of the things in life most analogous to video games, where many a professional can tell you that they stepped away for a time. Funny enough, this seems to happen a lot between the ages of 18 and 25, although also around when they became a teenager. Levi Rosman, or Gotham Chess as you probably know him, is very vocal about the stress pursuing a Grandmaster title brought him, and while probably one of the better Blitz players the world over by even many Grandmaster standards, he stepped away from that pursuit because making content for YouTube better encapsulates his idea of enjoyment in the world of chess. Of course, you might find what I'm saying stupid, or not at all helpful, but I think a lot of people are trapped in their idea of what they're supposed to do while playing a video game. Hell, it's a concept that you can apply to a lot of things in life. Basically, anything you do when you stop doing it for your own reasons. It's not easy to get out of that way of thinking either. You might not care too much about what you're doing in a game, and care more about who you're doing it with. You might be more concerned with experiencing everything a game has to offer than mastering the competitive aspect of it. Maybe you've been a casual gamer this whole time, and it's just pushing yourself to do something new and more challenging that's the trouble. Also, you might just not enjoy a game at that time. I booted up Fallout 4 3 separate times, played for an hour, and reminded myself never to touch it again, before I finally sat down and was really up for the experience. And this all might sound simple and obvious, but it's not. We stop experiencing things the same way after enough time, and it's easy to assume that we can't feel that same way anymore. But in truth, you can feel that way again. You just won't get there the same way.